Okay, we get to continue our scintillating conversation after lunch here. Things seem to be building to kind of a fever pitch, and that's good. We want to go away from this conference with a fever and infect other people. I noticed that there are a number of old vets around the room, grizzled old vets who have been in Farmville wars past. And, either we're just really persistent or else we're kind of bordering on insanity. But it's good to be back here with you in Minneapolis. And I must say, IATP must have a lot of street creds around here, because this is the top of Minnesota, I'm sure. And I want to thank IATP for inviting me out. I'm from Southern California, and we've been experiencing an endless summer. We've just totally skipped over winter. So it's great to come out to a place to see a little white stuff on the ground here. I was talking with my dear friend Fred Kirschman this morning. He said that Iowa had the coldest winter on record. Is that right, Fred? I think in California, at least Southern California, we had the warmest winter on record. So you can see, climate change is real. It is us. It is happening. And we are going to simply experience more and more erratic weather patterns. So as Fred said this morning, we have to get more anticipatory. We have to get better prepared for this transition that is actually taking place. And I believe that, as we go through this transition, that what we have to do, what our job in this room in order to get organized, is that we have to create a new compelling vision, something that we can organize around. And I really subscribe to what Buckminster Fuller once said, and this is a paraphrase. He said something like, you can't change existing reality, but what you can do is build a new model that makes the old obsolete. And so, we were talking about the power soccer metaphor this morning. Hopefully we can totally change that game, maybe call it cooperative soccer or something like that. Anyway, I'm really excited about this panel discussion that we're going into, and I have to tell you that we just kind of put this together late last week. I just met Jemila and Patty for the first time today, but I'm looking forward to this panel on healthy food access and local ownership and control. So I want to start out with two big kind of framing questions, and they actually relate to the work that we're doing in the food commons. And those two questions are, should a community be able to feed itself? Should a community be able to feed itself? And, of course, most people shake their heads yes. And my answer to that is yes, to the greatest extent possible. And I think that question, leads us into healthy food. I mean, more and more people are waking up to the fact that good food equates with good health, and good health with healthy communities, right? The second question is, should that same community own and operate its own local food system? And my answer to that is yes, to the greatest extent possible. And I think we were just starting to get into new ownership models and so on with that last panel, and I hope that Patty will take us a little bit deeper into that today. And right before we came back from lunch, I was talking with Jose and sharing with him the John Lewis Partnership model out of the UK. Have you heard of the John Lewis Partnerships? Well, I'm a little surprised because last year they were named the Retailer of the Year Award in the UK. They are a company that's 81,000 employees. They're over 100 years old. Started out as a clothing company, then became department stores. A number of years ago they bought Waitrose supermarkets. But what's really interesting about JLP is that all of the 81,000 employees are considered partners. And they're legally organized as a trust. And for instance, this last year, when they did their annual profit sharing, the head of the company got the same share of profits as did a cashier in one of their Waitrose supermarkets. So there are new ownership models out there. Well, this one's not old, I mean new, but old. But there are new models out there that we need to pay attention to and take a look at. Okay, so, panelists, are you ready? Okay, here we go. So, Jemila, are you going to go first?
I guess so. I'm actually going to stay here, if that's okay. The mic will be closer and it's easier for me to not stand up right there. First of all, thank you very much. And I'm going to do my best being the first person after lunch. So that implies that some people are not listening and already asleep. But let's hope not. So in taking into consideration the two questions you posed, I think that it would be most relevant to give a little background around the food dignity work. And I think that creating that context of where, what brings me here to today to even share is important. In 2008, I joined Cornell Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County in Ithaca, New York. And for those of you who've been to Cornell or to Ithaca College or even just to Ithaca, New York, you know that it's an absolutely beautiful community. It's known to be fairly progressive. We've had some accolades spoken to us as being enlightened, and I'm not quite sure what that means nationally, but I do know that it's a really hopping and robust food system that's going on in Tompkins County. When I started my work at Extension, I came to this work with an interest actually in biomedical engineering originally, and came to Cornell for a pre-med program. So during that time, my interest shifted, and I became more interested in what was happening on like community organizing front. I eventually decided that I would use my social work degree to actually mobilize in communities, and went back to home. I earned my master's at Stony Brook, and ended up coming back to Tompkins County in Ithaca and started working in this position. Not really knowledgeable actually around the food system, not understanding what a food system is. And I think that for me, I'd like to say that there was a time when I might not have been so forward and honest about my background in working in the food system, because I'd want to try to impress you or somebody, or want to hide the blind spots in my own knowledge base that I don't bring to this. But given the nature of this type of work, we're actually, at least from my perspective, what we're looking for to make long-standing changes around and positive changes, transformative changes around food access is that we want more people at the table like me, you know, who maybe years ago didn't understand the food system and didn't understand how that operates and the cross sections between like systemically how that impacts different parts of our lives. So when I started the food system work, I had to really do a fast-track education, self-educating myself around all the aspects of the food system, from agriculture, the history behind it, and more importantly in Tompkins County. I saw my role as taking this food dignity grant, which is a USDA AFRI grant out of the University of Wyoming, that actually was conceived with a lot of input, but particularly by Dr. Christine Porter, who you made reference to earlier, is that, and she worked in Tompkins County. So we had a chance to work together for about 2 years, and it really shaped the grant. So right now the award was began in April 2011 and involved 5 counties. Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, Albany County, a little rural county in Wyoming. We're at Dick Deaton Farms in Oakland, East New York Farms, which is sort of represented here today with my colleague out there, and Sharita, and the whole community project. And each of us had the task then to take this food dignity grant and carry it out, implement it, the resource package, community organizing package in our respective cities. Counties. And in Tompkins County, I don't have a farm. I mean, what really do I do? I'll tell you what the mission that I define is. My work is the whole community project facilitates collaborative efforts of individuals, organizations to support the health and well-being of everyone in Tompkins County. WCP is to be a place for dialogue and action for all communities that make up our county. It will take a whole diverse community to make a difference. So using that mission, which was the work before the Food Dignity Grant was awarded, when that came into place, I said, so how do I frame this work so it fits with Tompkins County? A little bit of Tompkins County, it's absolutely beautiful. We have, if you come there almost any time of the year, the food system has so much to offer. We have farmers markets, we have satellite farmers markets, CSA shares, we have a lot of really robust activity. We have a cooperative. I mean, you might believe that we're just fine. But in reality, when I started this work, I learned that there was increasing growing numbers of food insecure, people that were food insecure. I came to Ithaca in 1979, so with that in mind, I had worked in programs as a community organizer, social work programs that reached into, the pockets of the rural surrounding municipalities where I saw poverty on a level that was really impacting people in rural communities. Because in a small community, we all know it, that oftentimes if you are a leader, an educator, and you're of color, you're sort of earmarked or targeted to really be the spokesperson and the liaison and the educator and a whole host of other things to the communities that you share that representation. So looking at the communities of color and looking at people who are low income and with limited resources, I saw that that's where we were having growing concerns around food insecurity. And beyond that was really the issue around our health. So there were so many different places in this work that I entered in saying, well, with this opportunity over 5 years to administer and play a key role in the direction of this resource package, let's see what we can do to actually take our really great food system and take it to another level. Of course, that sounds really nice until you start unpacking what that looks like, because then what you're doing is you're talking about change. And change is uncomfortable wherever you are. And so what I saw was that in Tompkins County, over the past 3 years, there was a need to to do some research, actually, to assess what people who are involved in the food system, who are food insecure, who have not been represented in the conversations, the planning, the thinking, in businesses, the whole spectrum of the food system. What is their awareness around our food needs, not just about security, but as it's related to health. So I spent the first couple of years researching that, visiting, talking with people in the community, because I'd been there for a while. I was fortunate enough to have some of those connections already built in. And part of what happened is that in my work, I used networking as a model of bringing people into Tompkins County and actually arranging for them to come to events like this, people who normally wouldn't be at the table, to actually meet with other people. So I was very fortunate to have had the support of a local foundation, Park Foundation, who came to me and approached and said, how can we help to support your work, which was great, because we usually run after foundations, and they came to me. Not with a big bag, but they did come. And it was wonderful because I was able to organize some food system tours where people from those communities that we target or we look at as wanting being in here in this dialogue and conversation, to go to places like Detroit and go to D-Town Farm, go out to Oakland, go down to New Orleans and see what are happening in various places. And that was one of the approaches that I thought was really important if we are going to look at changing our food system so it can be sustainable. And actually, it's the how-to part that I thought was necessary, and I still firmly believe it, is to get people who are not at the table to feel that they're honestly welcome there. We know that it takes a lot to muster the courage to go into an environment where you're not familiar with and share, even if you're confident in whatever level of expertise you carry. When you go into a place that you're not familiar with, it's quite daunting. So it was really important for me to know that there are leaders out that represent the voices of people who are marginalized in our society, but that are working together to improve the food system. So that was part of my strategy, and also to bring some of those folks into Tompkins County to share, so that people could have a real live moment, so that they can be inspired. Another piece that I think was really important is not just like, we want to improve the access of food, and the model that food dignity that I'm carrying forth involves making sure that we literally get food into onto the plates of people who need it right now, and to do so in a way that isn't that's sustainable, that gives people dignity. So I don't want to just deliver food to poor people. I really want them to learn how to fish and not give them a fish, and in that way. So I'm looking at improving the access of food dignity work, is improving access in schools and through community centers, community gardens, training youth and teens through a youth farm project. We support efforts in Tompkins County, which is really wonderful. And also looking at economic development. So Tompkins County is exciting in a lot of ways. I had the opportunity to be involved with the, oh boy, now I'm gonna miss the term for it. Okay, so there's a lot of focus on local development, and I attended Business Alliance for Living Local Economies, Valley, conferences twice. And in our community, we're really interested in what can we do to reduce the carbon footprint? How can we work together to do this? And one of the things is, let's invest in more local use and build our local economy. So in the food system, we also have opportunities within our community to broaden the scope of who local farmers are. Really have some people come to the table to contribute to our food system that are normally not there, and to listen to what would really work for small-scale farmers and people who are from Ecuador or Colombia or have agrarian skills that, you know, have not been engaged. So in this work, the food dignity work, it's really around positioning our community, taking advantage of some of the things that exist in our community to improve the access, but also to improve the opportunities for people in the community, especially those that are marginalized and the most negatively impacted by not having a voice and say in decision making, to really create the spaces where those individuals can have opportunities to share some of their ideas and some of their solutions to daunting things like food insecurity and malnutrition that exist, even though we have lots of so-called food out there. And so I think that in sharing that, I can safely say that, like, you know, the work that I see happening right now as people have more understanding of how it's relevant to their own lives is, and I'm talking about people that we would like to be involved in changing systems, because areas that are broken in our food system and not working need to be addressed. And the efforts that have historically approached those still leave us with these growing food insecurity and ill effects. So, you know, I stand firm on the fact that during my work, I have met some wonderful people who really would have been diamonds in the rough. They would have just been lost, and I would have never heard, you know, if we didn't really go out there and find these folks in the community, might be, you know, suffering from food insecurity, they might not. But many of them are, have a history of agriculture in their family, either from the South or just to live. They are the ones that really have an interesting narrative about what would really change their lives. And so I'm, you know, I look at this interesting position because I'm on a grant that's going to end in 2 years. So what does that really mean if we talk about it? So I obviously have some personal interests that I bring to the table. And in knowing that, I realize that if my personal interest in doing this work is only driven or primarily driven by my need to establish my career and my need to maintain my security around things, then I'm really not going to be very effective in doing what's needed here. Because what it is going to do is this work involves finding the courage to even challenge my own approaches and challenge the approaches of well-established and traditional institutional structures. It's work that we absolutely have to do from my perspective, but the way that we do it is really important because it's not always safe conversation, it's not always comfortable, it's very messy, and I personally like to avoid those things for real. But you know, there is no way that we can actually make the type of change that will, and I'm going to say it, alleviate the suffering that comes from not doing that. Like the only thing that really compels me to want to do something for you or anyone here would be me being able to have a human connection with your real experience. And until we're able to do that, which is a little scary, and what does that really mean? But I'm a social worker, so that's how I speak, you know, that's some of the stuff that we know we have to do, you know, because there's fear that can sort of lead us to doing things, you know, there's so much urgency around these concerns. When we look at the pesticide impact on our, you know, our world and our lives, there seems to be urgency. I believe that we have an opportunity here, and I'm looking at it more from the fortunate position that I'm in to live in a community that is doing a lot of talk and meeting and trying to work towards, you know, having a collective impact, realizing that we have to engage people who are negatively impacted by the work that we do into the conversation. And I think that, you know, what's important for me, because I want to close this, is that in order to do this, we really have to support grassroots work. And I'm working for an institution that's connected to an institution. And I understand now, because it's easy to sort of say those institutions, those are all bad people, and then those are all the good people. I mean, we're in the room with the good people. But the fact of the matter is, it's not as dry cut like that. And it's going to be finding the commonalities in our own intention, whether it's, you know, whether we move in more of a formalized arena, where we can say the person who's in the institutions can actually, there can be a space and there can become some of that dialogue where I'm relating to you who represent grassroots, because I understand that you're not you're not just wanting to slam everything that I believe in, but that it's the humanity. We have a responsibility. In Tompkins County, there's room for that kind of conversation. It's still messy, but I think on a broader scale, as long as we can connect more with one another, we can identify our common and shared interests. And I believe in a big way that those interests are aligned with a lot of people that are outside of this room that have yet to come into these conversations. We just don't know it, you know? And my work has given me an opportunity to meet some incredible people, those who are resourced and those who are not. And I think that I'll close right now on that, you know. Yeah, I'll leave it open for questions.
So Jemila, thank you very much. I think this clearly demonstrates that healthy food access is much more about, it's much more than just feeding people. It's about raising voices in a more democratic society. So thank you for that. Patty, your turn.
Okay. Hey everybody, my name is Patty Lovera and I work for Food and Water Watch. And it's probably reasonably ironic that I work in Washington, D.C. and I'm on a panel talking about local control and local ownership. But maybe that gives me a perspective to see some of the layers of what those things can be. So before I jump into that, I can't resist from this morning. We were talking about safety and labor and how those things fit together. So afterwards, ideally in the bar, ask me about a thing that's happening right now where the USDA wants to let chicken plants run much, much faster, and that's bad for everybody, workers, it's bad for consumers, it's actually bad for animal welfare, it's really only good for big chicken companies, which is why USDA is being pushed to do it. So if people are interested in making that connection that we talked about this morning, there is an opportunity right now. So having done that, let me talk about what I'm supposed to talk about up here, which is local control and local ownership. And the first thing that occurred to me when I saw that assignment was that I talk about local control really specifically, and probably too specifically for this big picture thing that we want to do. But I think it's actually worth spending a minute talking about that. At least for me, for Food and Water Watch, for I think a bunch of people in this room, when you say the words local control to us, we think about fights. And we think about often a fight to keep local control or a fight to get it back. And then there's lots of places those are happening, and I actually think there is some common cause we can find with other groups about this past the world of food, but we use that language when we talk about factory farms and whether county levels or even township levels in some parts of the country can zone them or regulate them. We're having that conversation about GMOs now, and whether a county could have a cultivation ban and say you're not going to grow this here, or require something else like reporting. We're increasingly hearing it in the resource extraction field for fracking, or mining the sand that's used in fracking, or taking the wastewater that results from fracking. But what all of those issues boil down to is democracy. We just don't use those words. We talk about local control, which is probably a mistake. And the other thing that occurred to me is this is how, whenever people here know about the concept of food sovereignty, right? There's principles of food sovereignty. It's an international movement. It's really a big, huge tent we can gather people under. And I've always loved those concepts, and I've always loved the principles, but I was a late adopter on using those terms, using the words of food sovereignty, because whenever I said it to people here, it didn't really work for them. I think in part because Americans don't really think about sovereignty very often or respect it all the time for other places. And so I think local control is American for food sovereignty, right? We want a system where we can determine how we're going to feed ourselves at the level of democracy we think we have the most access to. And we're seeing that when we have some success at that level, so when a county passes a health ordinance and says you're not going to put a large confinement operation this close to a waterway or this close to a school, you can pretty much set your watch by the fact that the next legislative session in the state capitol, they're going to come try to take away the ability of local governments to do that. So, as much success as we've had at the local level, as much opportunities at the local level, we cannot let down our guards, because they will try to take those opportunities away from us. And that's the first place that my mind went when I heard about local control. So I think building power at the local level is fantastic, and there's tremendous opportunity there, but we have to be nimble in what we can use that power for, and we have to shift that power to whatever level of government the threat is coming from. And the words the nerdy legal word for it is preemption. We're having that fight when we talk about GMO labeling. We have that fight when we talk about regulating factory farms. But as soon as we have some success somewhere, this industry is very good at going one level up and saying this is where the ball game is now. And if we've only practiced down here, we're not going to be ready. So as we do build that power locally, which I think is tremendous opportunity and tremendously exciting, we have to be able to shift that power to the place where the game is. And the game is often escalating up another level. And I was really excited to hear a good conversation this morning about trade policy, because this is now taking that preemption game to Geneva or to wherever, where foreign corporations could come and they could sue your city for saying that you have to sell X% of the food, that X% of the food in your school system has to be local. And what city's going to stand up to Nestle or whoever does that, right? So this is adding an opportunity to take away local control, and it really is why we have to start talking about this trade agenda, this corporate trade agenda, and the corporate trade agreements as being anti-democratic and where every bit of energy in the food movement is, which is at the local level. So we really do have to start talking about it as a threat to the stuff we can do at the local level that everybody's so excited about. On local ownership, I am not even going to attempt to explain other models of ownership, which people in this room are much more qualified to do than I am, and I hope that we get to that in the discussion. But I do have a couple of thoughts about what it means in this bigger picture, policy conversation about beyond the Farm Bill. In my mind, the local ownership piece, and I thought that was a good discussion this morning too about what the word local means. Local is shorthand, right? And we have to make sure that it's representing all the things we want it to represent. I mean, we're in Minneapolis, so Cargill is local here, right? In North Carolina, Smithfield is local. We know what we mean when we say local, but we got to be clear that it means all the other stuff, especially when we're talking about economics. It has to be fair economics. And I think what draws people to local ownership and companies that are rooted, food operations that are rooted in a place, is that the money's supposed to stay there, right? It's going to be a different model, hopefully, with different values and different policies and different procedures, if the money's not being sucked out to Wall Street or to the Chicago Mercantile or wherever the money is going. that's the appeal, I think, for people, and we just have to make sure we keep that word honest as we talk about it, and make it not just about geography, but about the model. So there's lots of challenges and obstacles to building this kind of local ownership. You all know them, right? I mean, if we're talking about farmers farming locally, they have issues of access to land, or if you're talking about food processors, they have issues of access to infrastructure. Capital is an obstacle for both those groups of people. So we know all that, and we have to get together and solve those problems. But the one last point I wanted to make about this local ownership or different ownership models is not to forget we can't just do that side of the equation and not deal with the other side of the equation. So there's folks here, again, who are more equipped than I am to talk about this, but I've learned a lot from hanging out with National Family Farms Coalition's dairy farmers who have taught me a great deal over the years. And one of which is just because something has a different ownership model, it doesn't mean it's achieving everything we need to achieve. So we have farmer-run cooperatives or farmer-owned cooperatives in dairy who have gotten bigger. And a lot of dairy farmers would say have gotten undemocratic and unfair because they've gotten bigger to try to keep up with the other side of the equation, the giant grocery stores, the giant food processors. So we can build alternative models, and the theory behind them, the theory behind farmer cooperatives was they were supposed to offer some countervailing force, right? Like you as an individual farmer can't take on the railroad, or you can't take on the grain buyer, or you can't take on the meat packer, but together, maybe you have a little more oomph and you're a countervailing force. But if we keep letting this other side get bigger, we can't get big enough to be a countervailing force to Walmart if we keep letting them just get bigger and bigger and bigger. If we're down to 2 meat packers instead of 4, or whatever's next in this crazy wave of mergers, we have to do both sides. Like the other side has to get smaller because we force it to get smaller, as well as we build alternative ownership models to try to have some more power in that connection. So it just makes me nervous to talk about one without the other. We have to do both because we're never going to be big enough to compete with some of these biggest players. Even if we got everybody into one economic unit, they have too much power because we let it get that bad. We have to demand the antitrust, the competition reforms that scale that back. So I think to tie this to what we heard about this morning, and I'm sure you all have much better examples of different ownership models and what they need to work beyond the Farm Bill. I think the conversation about power is really important. I think there's tremendous opportunity to use the enthusiasm around local to build that power, but to remember we're gonna have to use that power all over the place, not just keep it local. We can't hide at the local level from these problems. And I get that sense sometimes that people go off the grid a little bit, and I'm frustrated as hell about the Farm Bill too, but if we ignore it and put all of the energy into local, it's still gonna come get us, right? We can run, but we cannot hide from these food companies, and they won't leave local alone either. So as cheery as that is, you know, there's tremendous opportunity at the local level, but it can't be an excuse, right? It can't be an excuse not to build this political power that is so clear that we need. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Patty. I know you guys are ready to jump in with both feet, but before you do, I just have an example of a new ownership model that we're trying to do with the food commons. The first prototype of the food commons that we're developing is in Fresno, California. And I don't know if you know anything about Fresno, California, but it's right in the heart of the Central Valley of California. Fresno County is the highest grossing ag producing county in the country. They're right at $7 billion, okay? Fresno, the city of Fresno is a community of 1.2 million people. And when we started to do work there in Fresno, we found out that the congressional district that Fresno is in is the poorest congressional district in the country, which surprised the heck out of me. I thought, really? I mean, worse than Mississippi somewhere or Appalachia? It's in Fresno. So here you have this enormously wealthy ag county where everything has been exploited, extracted, and exported, right? And so you have this terribly impoverished community that is at the top of all the dreaded statistics list: poverty, unemployment, obesity, you go down the line. We're developing the Fresno Food Commons so that it is owned by the people of Fresno. Who owns the Green Bay Packers?
Green Bay.
The citizens of Green Bay, right? So, you know, ours is not exactly the same model, but it's the same kind of concept. You know, there's what, 250,000, 300,000 loyal cheeseheads that own the Green Bay Packers, right? So imagine, a big local food system in Fresno that's actually owned by the citizens of Fresno. Now, to do that is not easy because most of the securities laws that were written in the 1930s work against that, prevent that. Where small unaccredited investors can actually have a piece of the action and own a piece of Main Street, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we have to, change and work for. Okay, with that, you know the drill. We say something insightful, you say something more insightful, right? Okay, questions, comments? Right up front here.
So I just wanted to throw an alternative ownership model out on the table in hopes that other people will be interested and continue the discussion. But again, Dennis Olson from United Food and Commercial Workers. And I've been working with our local in Cincinnati for a little over 3 years now on what's called the Union Co-op Farm and Food Hub there. And it is now we have 15 employees that are farming 10 acres of land, and 8 of those are full-time seasonal, and 7 of them are full-time permanent, and the other 7 are full-time seasonal. And this is based on a 2009 agreement. This model is between the steel workers and the Mondragon Cooperative out of Spain, which is one of the largest worker-owned co-ops in the world, 80,000 workers around the world in 24 countries, $24 billion in sales or something like that. And the story started back in 2009 when Michael Peck, who's the North American rep to Mondragon, was with Leo Giard from the Steelworkers at President Obama's first economic roundtable conference. And they sat around listening to this meeting right in the middle of the financial crisis, and it was Timothy Geithner, it was Larry Sumner's, it was all of the Wall Street boys that plunged us into the 2008 crisis. And they got done with that meeting and they walked out shaking their heads, and they started talking about it, and they said, we have to come up with a new model, that this bait and switch Wall Street model just ain't gonna cut it anymore. And so that was where they came up with this model. And the basic feature of the model is in the Mondragon model, the workers are represented by social committees within the model. But they don't have a union, they're not unionized. And so in the merged model of the U.S. union movement and the Mondragon model, we actually we replaced the social council model and the Mondragon model with an actual union committee elected by the worker owners, who then negotiate a real contract with the management, who are also worker owners. And I think one of the things that this does is that I think too often in worker-owned co-ops, and truly worker-owned, not farmer-owned, not consumer-owned, but in worker-owned co-ops, if you look around the United States, there's very few that are bigger than 200 or 300 workers. And I think part of that reason is, in my limited experience in talking with the community, is that I think that worker owners, they form a worker-owned cooperative and they think they've solved the management labor problem or tension, and they haven't. And I think what this model, one of the promises of this model is that it gives the permission to the union committee that they're going to wear their worker hat and they're going to represent the interest of the workers, even though they are worker owners. And on the other side, it's telling the management, okay, you're wearing the management hat and you have to look at it from the management point of view, and your job is to make sure that this company makes it in the long term. And to acknowledge that tension up front, I think gives us an opportunity to scale up, to get beyond that 200 worker ceiling. And just one other thing, the other thing that the unions bring to the table are the health care and the pension potentially, we're hoping, and union wages with the contract. But also, I think importantly for this discussion, we bring a political arm. So that's one of the things the unions still on the left are, it's one of the things we still do well, is we can mobilize lots of people on elections and make a difference, at that higher level. So that's the model, and I would love to talk more about this to people who are interested in exploring it. Because one of my other roles from the internationals, in addition to just supporting Ellen Vera, who's been our spearhead on this, is I've been floating it to other locals around the country and just saying, here's the model. Does this make sense in your community as a growth strategy for the union? Because the other thing that comes with a union contract is union membership. So if we can convince unions that this is a growth strategy, then the unions are going to have an incentive to put resources into the model to grow the model.
Thanks, Dennis. New models, new models. Another question right up front here. Yes.
I'm Brad Wilson. I'm here, Iowa farmer, here independently. I want to reinforce Patty's point about local control. I'm supposed to hold this thing, but and the levels of local control. So yeah, they want to take away from the county or the city and push the authority up to the state, up to the federal, up to the international. And what she's saying is the international wants to take them all away from everybody. But I just wanted to highlight the sort of another side to that is that if you go, as I have to, for example, the work of Olivia Campesino, and of course there's a big emphasis on food sovereignty, that they point out that there's a macro level of food sovereignty. It's not just local control, but it's also market management and regional, whether it's globally, regional, or international. But most important is that there's market management in the United States. And we don't have a movement that even knows what that is. In other words, we don't have a movement that even knows what the commodity title is, or what the Farm Bill is. The movement thinks, our movement here, thinks that the Farm Bill is a collection of spending categories. That all it is spending. And so the strategy, therefore, would only be take away from one spending, give it to another. Commodity farmers get spending, and that's assumed to be an injustice, when in fact the market management part was taken away. So it's equivalent of a zero price floor, equivalent of a zero minimum wage that we had, that was done to farmers before they started to get any subsidies. So this whole thing of market management, which frees up $100 billion or whatever for all these uses, is unknown. And so we had a farm bill discussion, but we didn't have a farm bill because it wasn't a real farm bill that included market management. And so there's that piece in there where the market is something to be controlled, to be managed. It's a part of the commons. It's like land reform. Do you get your fair share of the price? And
Thank you. I want to ask Jemila a question. I'm just curious, in your grassroots organizing efforts and doing more educating and so on, do you ever talk about the Farm Bill?
In Tompkins County, there are groups of individuals. It's actually fragmented still, and that's part of the challenge, is to bring all of these discussions together, or at least make sure that we're touching the topics. With regards to the Farm Bill, I think that in my work, which has been really focused on organizing within grassroots environments and groups, that there is a lack of even an understanding of the connectedness to the Farm Bill, to their daily needs. And making that connection, the hope that we see and where I see most activity and moving forward in Tompkins County is with small-scale local farmers. And so that's where I just see discussion happening, and I'm really focused around farm to plate in terms of school institution.
Another question right up here, or comment?
I have both, actually. First, just again to reinforce the wonky preemption issue, just to share that from the pesticide world, we experienced many years ago a very intentional campaign by industry to take all the control to the state level. There are now, I think, 12 states where counties and cities can still have rules, pesticide rules that are stricter than the state level. But there were many more. And that was basically, there was a very intentional campaign to move that all up to the state level. And so what we're seeing now is we're kind of at an interesting moment. You heard about Hawaii this morning that has buffer zones and restrictions because they still do have local control. So they're putting rules in place to protect their communities from pesticide drift, for example. But now the industry is moving in to move that control up to the state level. So it's a very real dynamic. I think that we might have an opportunity, it could be an opportunity that Juliet mentioned this morning, to break the rules and challenge that, to work with communities to put rules in place that challenge those preemption rules, and then it becomes a legal fight, but then you're bringing the whole issue of food democracy and local control into the public conversation. So love to hear some comments on that, and then I have a second question for all of you, which is around food policy councils and your feeling of kind of opportunities and limitations of local food policy councils as a vehicle for bringing these issues up and making change at the local level.
I'm going to address the food policy piece because that really has been something that's been brought up in the work that I'm doing and I'm involved in. In Tompkins County, there are, I'm sure I'm only identifying just two, but there seems to be two factions around that there really doesn't necessarily need to be this aggressive move towards a food policy council that we're doing pretty fine and it'll be okay. And I think that there's this growing concern amongst grassroots folks and folks that are organizing or becoming more aware of how this kind of conversation impacts their personal life to want to see a food policy council form. Because ultimately decisions in the food system are made whether there's a food policy council there defined. So from Tompkins County, what I see and what I think is going to be the angle of my involvement is to continue to facilitate the education and awareness about people, amongst people who don't know what the role of a food policy council would play in it, and then, surely by numbers, the people who are more disenfranchised that need to have a voice, and that's where I'm sort of shaping my work right now, is that there can be, there are many examples of networks, smaller groups that are organized that actually are sort of watching the movement of policy decisions. And I see in Tompkins County that we are now moving towards food policy, even though in the past 3 to 5 years I didn't hear much talk about it. Now it's coming to the forefront. And in terms of how I see that food policy council evolving there, is that we have to have this other group of conscious people who are influencing the direction of the policy, and that's what's happening in Tompkins County.
Let me just speak to the preemption fight. So the question is is the legal route the way to go? And the answer is maybe sometimes, right? It depends. Courts are not neutral, right? Despite what the movies tell us. And you have to do your homework and figure out what court you're going to go to. And there's some places you might be able to go get it back, and there's some places where you might just cement that you don't have local control. So in different places, it's taking different forms. The one that I am aware of, just because Food and Water Watch is involved in it, is in fracking in Colorado. Some towns put it on the ballot and said, we don't want to let you drill for gas within our city limits. In one case, they wanted to drill on the elementary school campus, right? But they technically didn't have the power to do that, and they did it anyway to have that fight. And so that fight is now evolving, and it will end up in court. In other places, maybe it's not such a hot idea looking at who runs the courts, right? Who the appointees are, and doing that homework. I think this does have, so just in recent travels, I was in Wisconsin, and they don't think that that's, I was talking to a bunch of folks about this there, and they don't feel confident that they would do so well challenging it in court. So they're trying to build some common cause across a bunch of issues, which range from mining metals, mining sand that goes to fracking, regulating factory farms, and trying to stop mass extractions of groundwater for the bottled water industry. All of those lack. The county can't regulate any of them, and different counties are pissed about different parts of that. But they're trying to build some common cause with people who are not happy about what's going on with kind of the state taking over more educational stuff. So maybe there's ways for them to make it a broader political movement, which might take a while, but they feel like that's a safer route necessarily than going straight to the court. So I think it's going to be place to place based on doing your homework. Ideally, if you've got it, keep it, right? And there's some states that still have local control, like we have friends in Missouri. We're not here today, but there are friends with lots of us who every year for the last practically decade have had to go defend their local control so they get to keep it. So you'll miss it when it's gone. So if you still have it, keep an eye out in the state legislature and try to keep it.
Excuse me, I noticed the mayor from Madison had something. No, okay, yeah, right.
Thanks. Pat Kerrigan with the Organic Consumers Association. A mile or two to the south of us, there's a really great food shelf called Wait House. And it comes from this Jane Addams Settlement School of Social Work. And they have a really wonderful approach to meeting the needs of the low-income community, which is assets-based in that they serve a lot of Latino and Hmong households that have got a rich agrarian experience. And so they have, like, they go up to CSA Organic Farm up north, and they farm up there. They're working on a greenhouse on site. They do chef training for not only as far as different ethnic meals representing the community, but chef training to employ kids, teach kids food production skills, and then connecting them up with local restaurants. And so anyway, I'd love to hear, first of all, thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's really, really great to get your perspectives, but also I'd love to hear, as far as in Tompkins County, or any county for that matter, what are some good examples of assets-based in terms of drawing on the resources of the community and not just the needs? Thanks.
That's exciting for me to answer because, like I was saying, in Tompkins County, we have a lot of things that are going on. So we have a focus outside of the food system. We have groups of people that are really looking to invest in leadership development within the community. Not leadership development necessarily only on campuses, but in the community. So we have initiatives that are identifying people in the community. They are nominated. That's one. It's Natural Leaders Initiative, and it's out of Cornell Extension. And the result of that is that there are people who have been recognized, in the community who actually are leaders. I mean, they're the people that if something happens, everybody goes to this particular family or that household or whatever. And so the investment that our community is making in recognizing those individuals and then bringing them into the planning around what actually can happen here has led to some really exciting things. I mean, we now have, in Tompkins County, we have a youth farm project that employs through city funding and some county funding youth from the rural surrounding areas, also inner city youth, over the summer to actually work on this farm. The food gets sourced to community centers and a few after school programs. We also, it's contributed towards CSA shares, and we have various different little schemes, and actually Food Dignity is supporting a lot of this. I was responsible for starting an initiative called Gardens for Humanity, and Gardens for Humanity actually is this sort of grassroots, community-driven effort to go into neighborhoods, schools, community centers, and train youth from the very beginning, just getting them in touch with the food and growing it and starting there. So we take it there. Tompkins County also is fortunate. We have Groundswell. So there is an institute that received USDA funding that actually does farm training. So we have a lot of, and within the context even of social justice. So there are opportunities that we're drawing people from surrounding areas and inside of Tompkins County. I'm absolutely blessed. I'm glad to be here, but I am excited about going back to Tompkins County right now, and somebody should record that, because I don't always say that, because there's battles along with this work too, but because there are farmers that are coming to the forefront, people who have a history of farming in their past. I have a farmer who's from Bermuda. He's farmed ever since he's a child, and he recognizes at early 40s that there's lost generations of youth who are not doing that. So he's looking at creating a homestead, an education program that we can get more and more youth and people in the neighborhood to come out and say, this is how I would live more sustainably, this is how you and your wife grow chickens and farm and do that, and building a network there. So there's really like very exciting networks forming that are addressing access issues, and you know, farmers that are very committed. Many young farmers from traditional careers who've changed and moved to Ithaca, you know, to start like a more, that's a value judgment about what was good and what wasn't, but to work in this field.
I just got the high sign from Pete back there, so let me just ask the two panelists, do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
I mean, I think I'll just say, I don't want to be like Debbie Downer about local, right? That all of the enthusiasm, like everything that's hot in food, people are doing it in their communities, and that is tremendous. And in the 10 years I've been doing this, didn't see that 10 years ago. I think the question is not losing focus, right? And not zooming in only at the local level, that what we're building at the local level is an example that it can be done a different way, which is huge, right? When we hear all this bullshit about we can only have giant farms and we can only grow GMOs, right? We can show the alternative in practice, which is huge. We can get people involved and excited, but then I think it gets back to these questions of this morning of taking that movement, which is very much about food and individual stuff, and making it a movement of the political power. We need to fix all the stuff we're going to be talking about.
So I don't even know how to follow that other than, no, I'm glad, because that's really all that I leave. I mean, I leave this part not worrying about the presentation to think about how we can actually not, you know, keep the bigger picture moving forward and not lose sight of it, because you know, as I'm working on a local level, but being and, you know, understanding what's happening on different fronts, and how it's not just the food system and it's environmental is so critical. So I think that my request or my hope from this is that more of us will walk away feeling more connected with one another and able to support one another's work in that way, because it's very easy to get excited in the moment of these conferences and gatherings, but really what is it that's going to sustain it? And I know that I need you. So, you know, I'm already going to like spend the rest of the trip with you. So that's what I would say. Just really reevaluate our personal commitment to this, because it's going to take courage and it's not an easy job. But I believe that we don't really have many other choices, and it's really going to be a way that is going to be more hopeful for our future. So.
Well, those are good final words, courage and commitment. Thank you to our two distinguished panelists.